Yeah,
Can you see me?
yes, I can see you. I can hear you as well.
Hear you? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Having some.
I was actually telling you that I'm so paranoid about these lives because there's some audio issue or there's some it's not, you can't see, or the Wi-Fi goes away. And we did this so much during the pandemic. I was so scared that like the peak of the pandemic. Pandemic is still on.
Normal for me. Can you see me? Oh, bad Wi-Fi, bad network. That's fine. Well, that's
Yeah.
But I'm
Yeah.
so glad to hear and I'm very excited.
Same here.
I'll tell you now. Like, so, I've been following your work for a while. Like, not like particularly Instagram for a couple of years, and I was quite stoked when I saw you start posting out books. And yeah, so that's, and recently I think you commented something on, I think, Namita's post or about, like, we were talking about books, and she's also been on this on Kitabi live earlier. She's a voracious in, like,
that was actually the reason why when you approached and I was like, oh, Namita's, because Namita is my go-to book person. Like, I'll once in a while go and stalk her and be like, what is Namita reading? I have to get new books. Let me go and find out. So I was like, Namita ne kiya hai to legit hi hoga.
I think I'll take that. Like, I was very and Namita accepted it because her page is absolutely wonderful. But yeah, I was so excited because, as I was telling you earlier, the idea behind having these lives is to talk to people who, who experiment with different art forms and, like, have going with them in different forms of their career or however they're trying to push it for. And if at all, books play a role in it, because, right, books do are very essential. And I think it helps a lot of other people, right? Like people who are pursuing this as a hobby, people who are pursuing it something else, or simply for that matter, you mentioned that you picked it up during the pandemic, and that's something I really want to talk to you about, because I think that's a lot of people who, like our age, struggle with books, right? People who are generally into some art form or the other, they, struggle with picking up books. But I'll cut to this. I'll let you talk. Now, the first traditional question which I ask literally all my guests, so that's why I'm going to ask you the same question, is, so you're a fairly popular person on the internet, and there's a lot about you on, I mean, fairly, like, when you Googled, you are, like, people find who you are, right? At least know who you are. So, and there's a lot of you about you on the internet, like who you are, what you do. But I think in this day, I think all of us have some side of us that we keep hidden away from the internet. Like, so if you could tell us one bit about yourself, which we wouldn't find from your social media handle, right? Maybe related to books, maybe not related to books, but something that you wouldn't mind sharing.
My age and my birth date on the internet is wrong. I don't know why it's in Feb apparently on online, but my birthday is on May 29th. That's one thing that you won't find on the internet. But to answer your question more sincerely, I think we usually, the internet has more like controversy or like fun stuff that sort of like how many books do you read, or like, I'm a huge foodie. I don't think that you will find anywhere. I don't like the term foodie also because it restricts you, but I love eating and love cooking. And my mother's a brilliant cook, and our family tradition, like everything about us is food. We discuss what to eat for lunch during breakfast and dinner during lunch. So I don't think that you'll find it, because I work out really hard to be able to eat so much.
That's pandemic biggest issue, like how much to work out, how much to eat. But it's really cool to know that, well, you're a foodie, because I'm not, but like she's a foodie, so she ensures that I have like a bunch of stuff. She likes to experiment with making food and everything, so I always end up eating authentic.
That's great. That's the best thing.
But yeah, Sainee, for people who don't know this, Sainee does a lot of different kinds of art forms. She's a poet. She writes for slam poetry, which I watching. She's a Gulzar fan. I know that. I've seen a lot of her Gulzar films. She's an actress. She's a screenwriter, and recently, that is during the pandemic, she picked up reading, right? Which is a very, interesting hobby. I personally love it, and from what I know, she has been loving the journey. So, Sainee, what exactly got you to start reading? Like, I know the pandemic hit everyone hard, and everyone had a lot of time in their hand. But why reading? Like, what drove you towards this?
So I used to always read because that's Javed Saab always says that the problem with our generation, or like I always quote him saying that the problem with our generation is that we are very quick to write but not very quick to read. And we should be reading more. So I used to always read out of that guilt that I need to also consume before putting out. But as a kid, I was always a very high functioning a child who was not, so my attention span was very less. I was very good academically, but then you just end up reading your books.
Right.
So as a kid, I never grew up reading a lot. As through college, we had a lot of assignments where we would, like, the White Tiger was an assignment, so we had to read it. So essay, I would read books, you know, but it would always be like one book in 3 months, so one book in, when suddenly guilt hits you and you're like, I should be reading, and then you read so I did the whole journey of The Alchemist and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and you know, those books that everybody tells, Eat, Pray, Love, those books that everyone's reading when they're in their teens. But I think in 2020, what happened was, and there also I picked up slowly, but I read 40 Rules of Love. And then I ended up reading a bunch of other books by Elif Shafak. And then again, I stopped. Because you're also consuming a lot of movies, you're consuming a lot of music, you're listening to podcasts. Now there is so much to listen to. You also have to write. So I'm also like, even now I was reading just some time before, and I know that time is also allotted to writing because I'm working on something. So then that indulgence also makes you feel a little guilty. I stopped again, but the second wave hit me really hard, and it sounds very privileged because you know, you have a roof on your head and you're doing really well, you haven't fallen ill, but it was too much for me to take another lockdown, and I just resorted to books. I read Normal People. That was the first book that I read sometime like in Jan 2021. And I realized that it was just so, after a really long time, I was being able to invest completely in something that's not me, or that's not life. And it's like it's soaking me in and it's taking me with it, and that just felt so relieving and nice, because every distraction also felt like you keep going back and coming, like you were watching something, you go somewhere, then you come back, like you're distracted. But when I was reading Normal People, and what a brilliant writer Sally Rooney, I was also a little intimidated because she's around my age, and I was just like, "Arey yaar, what a brilliant writer." But luckily I read the book and then I Googled her. But I remember the last page, when I was reading the last page, I had this pit in my stomach where I realized that, oh my God, the book's over. And tomorrow I'm not going to be able to read it. And I immediately went online and I ordered Anxious People, which happened to be because I was reading up a lot on Frederick. And I didn't want to go back. I mean, Man Called Ove is all we know. So, and there this whole thing started where I started researching. And that was the fun part. Like, you go on Goodreads and you read about these books and you're like, oh, then I understood this is my genre. This is the kind of stories I like. In the beginning, I could only read a lot of fiction. Because it felt better than reading nonfiction. Then I did pick up a bunch of nonfiction because I thought now I can slowly go into, but anything that's not appealed to me has not gone. But luckily so far that's not happened. Every book I've picked is a book that I've loved and I finished it. I was making a list and I realized I've read around 21 books in the last 4 months, which is abnormal. But yeah, it's crazy. I read, and my mother was asking me this. She was like, "Do you remember what you're reading?" Because every time I see a new book in your hand, and I'm like, I remember everything. But it's been like it's been much fun.
Quite a journey, to be very honest. I mean, so you've experienced literally what I would call, like, you know, classic bookish people traits, like going to Goodreads and like that bit and the book's ending.
Yeah, so exciting. Like, oh, what next? What am I going to read? And this is so something about human stories, love and life, that sort of brought together is something that. So I've not yet gone on like crime thrillers, and that's still not my genre. I experimented a lot in like young adult also, and realized that I'm a little more adult than young. So like I'm sort of figuring out where I need to go, but it's just such a fun fun journey. And just discovering authors, like I read a book and I'll call a friend and be like, listen, this author I have discovered. And in my head, I have only discovered this person. Nobody knows them. And then they go like, yeah, you should read that book by them. And I'm just like, just isko pata hai. मैं ही late हूँ. लेकिन ठीक है.
Problem. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's and this is, first of all, when you point out like you figured out your genre, which is great, because I think a lot of people struggle with that, and I think that puts them off book initially, because so what I've realized, at least in all my life, like I initially was that person who would ask people to read, like even my friends, and I would just give them books that I thought I liked. But it turns out it's not, and just like how art is, it's not that they will like the exact art form that I would, right? And
Yeah.
like the story, because when you mentioned not explored crime thriller, which is fine. I mean, you can go your life in those genres and you'll stay. And as for young adult novels, I think it's an age when you have to read. I mean, I really won't recommend like Harry Potter to anyone in their 20s. I mean, I don't think they will. So it's not great writing, but it's just a great narration, or like I mean, set aside the problems, the problematic stuff that JKR has said, but like all YA novels. Like I think the context in which you're reading is far more important for at least those kind of novels.
Yeah.
But it's quite interesting that you mentioned a lot of fiction. That you read fiction, and that you did shift a bit to non-fiction. Is there a particular kind of non-fiction that you pick up, or is it just something right now in the stage of exploring?
I mean, I would actually also want to mention, when you said Harry Potter not to people in their 20s, I think I have come to realize that these books are now really helping me more than they did when back in the day when I read them. I read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I read Charlie Through the Looking Glass now, and it really inspired me. I read The Little Prince. That was the last book I read before the book that I'm reading right now. I read Alice in Wonderland, and it's so overwhelming because now you understand what these life lessons meant. So I think even if I go back and look at Harry Potter, it's actually going to give me a new perspective. Something about, firstly, I think the best content out there is for children and like genuinely, like the best content out there is for younger people, because it's just so warm and true to life, because you learn values and kindness and love, and it's unadulterated. The older you grow, the more the books have more corruption, because your characters have more corruption, right? So there's something very, like The Little Prince was just so heartwarming, and it doesn't make sense to an adult person. It sounds too true to life, but that sort of stayed with me because it's so honest. What I really look at right now is, so what I'm doing is, now I know I love normal people, so I go via normal people. So I know that the the suggestions that I'll get is in that zone only, and so anxious people happened and less happened, and now I'm reading Clara and the Sun. So like a bunch of, I kind of go via. What I usually look for is human stories, and I don't know what this genre will be called. Actually, you can help me. Is it romance fiction? Is it human? What do
I rather refer to it like as more modern fiction rather than anything else, because because again, it's a very subjective way of looking at it, because for me what stands out is the more narrative emotions that I'm taking away rather than the bits from it, right?
Fair.
For Ishiguro is that was something that I take a lot more from in that context. But okay, so I do have to ask you this,
Okay.
because working a lot during, like particularly post like the initial peak of the pandemic, you've been putting out a lot of poetry and like seeing your work go up on the page. So has reading at all influenced your art form, like your work in any sense, like your writing or your performance or like anything of that?
Yes, definitely. I think we are all an amalgamation of things we've heard, read, watched. So definitely whatever art you consume becomes a part of who you are. I think in screenwriting, there's this quote which I'll paraphrase, but it says that there are only 6 essential stories in the world. So everything is a version of these 6 stories. So by that logic, everyone's getting inspired by something. But I think Javed Saab and Gulzar Saab at an early age had a huge. So I used to not read novels, but I used to, I was and still am very obsessed with lyrics at one point. So I used to listen to a lot of old Hindi songs and a lot of ghazals. And my mother is a huge fan of, I mean, maestros, like if I sit to name them. And at a very young age, I would sit and listen to. So there's something about words that always intrigued me. So, and in the beginning, it was just lyrics. And then as I was growing up, I discovered that, oh, these lyricists are also poets. So that's when I started picking up their books and reading their poetry. But initially, it was just this, reading short stories and poems, and now full-fledged books. But I think everything that you consume finds a way to come out of you. So that's the only way. Yeah.
And that's a very interesting thing you mentioned. Like, okay, I'm a huge Bollywood fan, and so for the longest time, I think till I was 15, 16, I did not know that Javed Saab and Gulzar Saab were poets as well, right? I just knew that they were lyricists. And and back then, I'm not very good at reading Hindi. Like, it's something that family holds for shame by. My mom was like used to write in Hindi, like it's वही कि मतलब क्या का नाम खराब कर. I still struggle a bit, and I think that's also, I mean, that's a reflection of the education system also, that we read a lot of everything around us is English and not made to be very comfortable with it. But
no, I am SSC student. So my Hindi and Marathi are fabulous. I struggled with English, but then later compensated.
तो बस हिंदी में फंस गया. So, but particularly when I found this out, and so I started and that was the day my approach towards Hindi poetry changed. So like I started reading a lot more Hindi poetry because of this. But so that actually takes me towards the next part of my question, right? I mean, yesterday you did this really fun Q&A on your this thing. You asked about the books, and I think someone mentioned the Kite Runner, and you'd put up something about it because you really liked the book, right? Coincidentally, it's my favorite book of all time. Like, I have a very odd story around it. So it's subjectively my favorite book, to the extent that I will acknowledge there are much better written books out there. But so I have a very odd story that when I was 10, my mother gifted me this book. Okay, and not a book to be read by a 10-year-old, but at any point of time. She just saw the Kite Runner kid, and she's like, okay, he likes to read. It's a bestseller. Looks like something. And I cried. I bawled, and I still do when I talk about it, when I read it. It's just something that brings tears. So, but that book has stayed with me all my life. Like, I mean, I've reread that book multiple times. Just every time I read it, gives me more insight into myself, or how I want to look at the world, or how I just want to go about doing at least things that the book talks. So in that context, like out of the books that you've read, what are the books which have impacted you, or like to the extent have changed your perspective about how you're looking at the world, or how you're approaching certain things or people?
Yeah, there are a few books, but I think Catcher in the Rye was that book for me. I read it at a earlier age. That was the first time someone spoke about mental health. And the way it was spoken was not victimizing your character. A flawed, very real character that that was the first time I felt that, oh, this is something that happens in the world and it's okay to talk about. Catcher in the Rye is that life altering book, at least in the beginning, that I mean, it's still one of my closest books. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy also did that to me. I was just mind blown by how, and Hitchhiker's Guide actually has a very amazing story for me personally. This was sometime in 2012. 2012 we used to have like a bunch of open mics here and there in Bombay, in Bandra. The poetry scene was not at all there. Like, so I mean, it was just fun and games. Now we make money out of it, and there was no, like, you didn't even know it existed. So I used to go for these open mics just for fun because I liked writing, and I would perform in front of an audience. So the gift that we used to get at the end of there was a competition. They were like, you can come and perform, and if you win, you can pick out 3 books from this Raddi books that are kept there. So used books, and you pick out 3 books, and those are your gifts basically if you win. And they gave, and this was the first time and actually the only time I attended such an open mic, and they gave me a word on, like I had to pick out a chit, and I remember the word was closet, and I wrote about the LGBTQ community or something I wrote in, but we had an hour to write, and in an hour I wrote it and I performed and I won. So I was like, oh my God, I won. This is insane. But I also got to pick out 3 books, and Hitchhikers was one of the books that I picked out. I picked out The Secret because there was nothing else there. And the third one, I don't remember, but I remember it was the 5-volume book, Hitchhikers. All the books. Yeah. So I was like, listen, this is to mera to jackpot, and these guys don't even know. So that's how. So I picked it out, and I was so excited that I won this. And I read the book, and I was mind blown. I was just like, "Se, this is what I want to write. Like, it's so deep and meaningful, and yet it's so light and fun that you are taking away such great insights." And the third book that I've read recently is called "Reasons to Stay Alive" by Matt Haig, and I cannot emphasize how necessary and important this book is to read. He talks about his mental health, so his journey with anxiety and depression. And usually when we talk about mental health illnesses, we make it a very, like, it's a very hush hush thing. You don't talk about it. It always leads to doom and death and suicide. When you see a success story, when you know this man is a successful author and he's struggling with depression, anxiety, you also see a side of it where you can survive it and fight it and not stigmatize it. Like, it's more for people to read and understand that if you have a fever, you're not always going to end up. And this is for people who look down upon mental health illnesses. I think Matt Haig talks about his journey, and then he talks about what we can do to overcome our anxieties and depression. And it's just a beautiful read. It's a beautiful book. Wait, I'm gonna find it. It's right here. Sorry. Yeah. If this one, it'll show it's ulta, but it's like a chotu book only, and it's pyar. Like, after I read it, I messaged all my friends and said, please get this book. Like, you have to read it.
No, and it's very, like, I mean, that's great. Like, these are the kind of books I think all of us should be reading. Like, first of all, like, when I talk about The Hitchhiker's Guide to Galaxy, I absolutely love that book. And when it comes to just talking about it objectively, so it's very difficult to make someone laugh just by reading something, right? I mean, so when you're performing, when you're on stage, you have like, I mean, you can use your eyes or your expressions or your hands and make your voice. But when you're reading, like, writing a joke and making the person who's reading it laugh is the most difficult thing, and Doug does such a brilliant job at it. I mean, it's like rolling on the floor, and at the same time actually talk about something, like, have a much deeper meaning behind it, right? It's fantastic how that book works.
I mean, the answer will always remain 42, right? No matter how old we get, like, it's there. So, yeah.
Even when it comes to reasons to stay alive, like, I mean, personally for me, a lot of it has come from, so I'm a huge Jhumpa Lahiri fan, right? And it's, so she's not one who will talk about depression directly, like she will not talk about her own, or, like, in the first person narrative, but her characters, right, they deal with a lot of these issues which people might call first world problems. They might be also, but they are such an in-depth journey into how the human emotions work, or how the human mind works, and how it's okay to have those kind of thoughts. And like, I mean, one of her characters, I still remember, actually I don't want to ruin the plot, so it's just this woman, like, yeah, it just, at one point of time, one woman, she's gives birth, and she realizes, like, she walks away from that family, right? She wants to pursue her life, and her character also talks a lot about that struggle, right? Like, a lot of it is just spoken about how she handles that pressure that happens at home. And I think these are the kind of things that all of us need to read a lot more about, because it just gives you more, I guess, empathy. And I think that's something that we need today as human beings, all of us, to be more empathetic. And to that extent, like, as much as I love Bollywood and, like, movies, I find books to be far better medium to express such emotions, just because, like, a writer can afford to have, like, I mean, not everyone reads it, but, like, 1,000-page long books describing things, going into in depth, while, like, when it's on screen or when it's being performed, you have a limited time and everything coming in.
Yeah.
But yeah,
But you can catch it. You can catch the pretension. That is also there. Like a writer can write 1,000 pages of a description,
right.
but you understand the sincerity comes through because you don't have actors, you don't have a director, no one's supporting you. This is just you. Right, and this happens even when we're trying to pitch a script, or I'm trying to pitch a story to somebody. When you're reading it, I'm telling you this is how I imagine it, but you have to imagine it while I'm writing it.
Right.
So the entire backbone. So there are some books when I'll read them, I know that ये author थोड़ा ये push कर रहा है, but some are just there because they want to tell a story, and that sincerity stays with you.
Okay, so move on to something slightly more fun, not serious. A overrated book that you found, like everyone's just like, oh, you have to read this book, and like it's something that we like you might consider it blasphemous to name it publicly, kind of thing.
I'm trying to think which one, because I would usually just leave it to say halfway.
If I had to pick something, like I'll take the first shot. I would pick up Artemis Fowl. Like I found Artemis Fowl to be very overrated, while everyone around me loved it. And it's not that I read it at an older age. I read it like when I was 16, which is a fine, decent age to read Artemis Fowl at. So yeah, and if I'm going a bit more mainstream, something that it would be. Let me remember. I think I was not a huge fan of, and this really hurt me when this thing. So I'm a huge Anuja Chauhan fan, and I think I did not really like her sequel to those Thakur Girls. The House That BJ Built was not something that I was, and even though like all Anuja Chauhan fans were like in awe with it, and I absolutely love all of her work. I'm in love with her as a person, but that was one book that was not really sold on.
I don't think I have reached that space only where I would start reading these Indian authors. So I think I'm too, like, it's still early for me, but I can tell you from the books that I've read, surprisingly, Midnight Library was something that I didn't love as much as people had hyped it up, which is Matt Haig again. So I'm like obsessing over his non-fiction. But I thought the plot was so repetitive, because once you read it, you understand that it's like, you understand where it's going, you know what life lesson you're getting. And like for 300 pages, I'm just reading the same. So it just felt thoda easy writing, but I'm not read enough to know. I read one YA book called Everything Everything. That was so lame. That was, I think, one of these kids only recommended it. Nicole Yoon and they made a movie out of it also eventually. Proper love story about this girl who's sick and this boy is her neighbor. It was like reading like a teenage chick flick, like a love romance story of like teenagers. But that was a really lame book. I was like, I could have read something else, but it was a good experience. But amongst the bigger authors, I'm not dead only to read. Like if it's thoda also too much to handle, I'm like, fuck this. So I don't read.
I mean, I don't think so. First of all, I mean, I think if I would go by like what you did, Night Library, I think I felt that way with Ikigai. That I just wanted to be. So I mean, when it came out, it was the rage. Everyone was like, "Oh, Ikigai, you have to read it. Life changing."
Yeah. Overrated. Yeah. Yes. Agreed.
Yeah. So bits and parts of it I was already practicing. The other was like, it's nothing about this book was life changing for me.
Yeah. Yes, I get it. I get what you're saying.
Right. And as for the other thing, when you're talking about like not dare to read authors, I think that itself is a very overrated thing. I mean, I think that is one message I can probably give you. Because, so for example, I'm a huge Murakami fan, and I think the first Murakami that I read was this book called 1284, which he published in 3 different volumes, but are now like sold as like bound together. And roughly 1600 pages, and I was so scared to pick that book up because I mean, like you're experimenting with an unknown author. The book has just come out. You heard a lot about the author, but mean, it's 1600 pages. It's really a lot of comment. And I have this tendency with things that I have to finish things that I start. So like till the only book that I've not series that I've not completed for that matter is the Twilight series. Like even when I was a teenager, I
just watched the films. If it's too much, I just watch the movie.
I could on the fact that how is this girl not finding it creepy? Like technically the guy is 103, 100 and something, 100 plus years, and he her room at night and watches her sleep. But she's like, cool, that's very romantic of this. But yeah, so that's the only book not complete. But then again, coming back to what we're talking about, I think it's very overrated. That I think particularly,
I think with non-fiction, it's so important to know what you're consuming, like what you said with Ikigai, because I mean, it's not made up, right? It's not a story that's going to take you somewhere. And I think that way Devdutt Patnaik will like, and I've read a bunch of non-fiction, but there's just something about Devdutt which is so earnest and sincere. And I mean, I love mythology because of him. But if you've not, have you read Devdutt? Have you read Jaya and
no, I've read like I'm a huge mythology fan, but like I've read like other was not.
I think he's incredible. And Devdutt Patnaik is someone that I think everyone, whoever wants to read mythology, should start. But I personally feel that non-fiction is a very tricky area, because you're believing whatever the person is saying to be true in the world.
Right.
So it's important that it's the right source.
Right.
Even with Buddhism.
Because as you fairly pointed out that it's not a story, it's something like, it's not something made up. It is something that's out there. So also the purpose we have you reading that particular book becomes knowledge acquisition, right? So it's akin, when you're after 10th or 12th, when you're taking streams, or like, I mean, if you're not, it's not that you hate like doctors, but you don't want to be a doctor. You don't want to read medical stuff. You don't want to get to know a lot of it. That's not something you want to do for 5 years. That on a very, very micro level, I guess, is what happens. Is that
very, very micro.
Very supremely micro level. If you know, like, achha, this is not something that is, just not something that I want to gain knowledge about. This is something. Right. But okay, let me ask you this. Have you like read any book which has helped you with directly with the work, like a book on writing or a book on, like, say, poetry or like performing or acting, something along those?
I don't read with the intention of like this will inspire me and now I will write, because then you end up writing what you're reading.
No,
it's very subconscious.
Thing. I meant more along the lines of like something to hone your skills, right? Like a book which
poetry books. So I think I would recommend starting with Gulzar and Javed. Selected poems, Lava, Tarkash. Read Triveni's by Gulzar Saab. Understand what Triveni's are. Eventually, then I started reading Bashir Badra and Sahir Ludhianvi, or just go on Rekta for hours and just read whatever is available. Because it's very necessary also for my work to understand. Like, I'm also studying Urdu. Like I take classes. Because after a while you're going to sound like, I mean, ठीक है आफ्ताब महताब आप कितना ही आपको you need to know the language, आप कितना ही कर लोगे. And I feel extremely cornered and guilty about, like, I need to genuinely know what I'm doing, otherwise I won't do it. Because we are representing this, it's a very small scene, but there is anyway a lot of flack with poetry. Is not as easy to consume as comedy would be. So it's important that if we are in whatever minute way also, even just on the internet, but if there are 12-year-old, 16-year-old kids messaging me saying, I watch your poetry, I immediately message them, okay, but also read these poets. Like, it's important. Don't watch my poetry and want to become a poet. How much ever you love me, and I'm flattered and I'm honored and I do work very hard. But please read more, learn more. So yeah, I also do the same thing that I tell people to do, which is to keep in touch with the craft, to be honest and genuine. So learning Urdu is technically not reading a book. It is taking lessons. It's studying, but it is to be honest and sincere to whatever you do it with sincerity. Then it doesn't matter if you're making reels for a living or you are an astronaut for a living. Like whatever, however society will weigh anything as anything. You do what, but with sincerity.
That's always gonna happen. I'm really admire what you just said, that putting in your do everything that you do with sincerity, whatever you're doing. I mean, like the society. I mean, so I work as a fund manager. Like I run my own fund, and so there's one end of society will say, oh, there's great money in it, and they'll be like, oh, you sold out for like money. There's no this thing in it, and that's the opposite of what someone who like say pursues anything artistic would get, right? Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
Oh, but you don't. Those kind of things. Like obviously, find.
I have both, so suck it. I'm kidding.
Yeah. आप लकी हो यार
अब मैं lucky है और नहीं. I'm kidding. No, but you're right. You're making a very valid point. Yes.
You probably have it both because of the very same advice that you gave, right? You're doing it with full sincerity, and I think that stands out as a very important thing for everyone, regardless of whether you're pursuing like standard career choice or in different career choice, whatever you're pursuing, right? As long as you're doing it with full sincerity, it's great. I think that and that brings us to the end of our interview. And
it was, wow, this is not controversial at all.
मैं बोला था,
I wrote down all the books that I've read. I was like, what if he starts asking me, name the books that you've read? And be like, this. But I keep posting them on my Instagram. I genuinely feel if I've read a book, I put it out, and a lot of my friends tell me, why are you, don't tell everyone, like keep them to yourself. And I'm like, the whole point is that you share it so that others also learn. And of course, two people are never going to take away the same thing. I hope. Exactly. Lest everyone judges.
First place, like I've been reading all my life, and a couple of years ago, I found myself on Instagram, and I was just scrolling, and I came across as everyone follows things they are interested in. I was following a Bookstagram page, and I just saw something, and it just made my blood boil. Okay, I saw like a really aesthetically well clipped picture of a book, and the caption was shit. Like it was just like how those. Oh, it's a 4 on 5 book, and it was basically book ka summary copy paste karke likh diya. And I'm like, a book so much more than this. Like it invokes different emotions in people. You can take away so many different things. Sometimes I've actually found myself taking away an absolutely different lesson from what the book spoke about. Like Marie Kondo writes about cleaning and neatness, and I took away a life lesson which could be applied to relationship. Like that is how powerful books can be. And that's literally why I started this. I'm like, okay, if there's nothing out there, at least the least I can do, like as an hobby at the very least, is like put something out there which people might like. There might it's great that you share your books on your your. In fact, I would really encourage you to like even type up your opinions on it. It would genuinely like, I think, make inspire people. And even if it inspires one more person to read a book or like just bring a change in their life, it's absolutely. So that now you know the kind of books I like. No, so can you recommend 3 books? Okay. I'm the interviewer now. Okay. Okay. So I will recommend. So I have an inkling that you would like these books, but I how much of magical realism you've read? I'm such a doc that I'm going to write them down. Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. What is the first one? Magic realism I love. Oh, you love. Oh, brilliant. So have you read Marquez? Anything by Gabriel Garcia Marquez? No, but I've been told like a million times. Okay. Yeah. Tell me. This one is going to be supremely cliched if you've been told. But 100 Years of Solitude is something you have to read. It's slightly heavier on this thing. Right? Next, I'll tell you is it's like okay, which one of these should I recommend? Okay. Now you know how we feel, huh? Yeah. Fine. I'll take that. Next one I would recommend is Sputnik Sweetheart by Haruki Murakami. If you've already not read it. Yeah. Yeah. And the last one which I recommend is something that it's not magical realism, but because you spoke about mythology, I think you'd absolutely love it. It's just published by Ira Mukherjee. It's named Song of Draupadi. It's supremely interesting book because so it's not that it's not been done earlier. I think Chitra Devakaruni already wrote Palace of Illusion, wrote about Mahabharat from Draupadi's perspective. But Song of Draupadi goes much deeper than that. It takes into account a lot of other female characters. It places, it challenges things that you would know about the Mahabharata, right? Because one thing that I think Chitra
Nice.
failed to do was it accommodated a female viewpoint, but still in a male-centric world.
Right.
Song of the other hand, just gives you a female view and shows you what it actually was when the world was viewed from a female-centric world. So what Draupadi was actually experiencing when this was happening around her, or what Kunti was experiencing, or for that matter, we speak about so many things. We don't speak about how Amba and Balika were like, kidnapped from their member and this thing, and how they felt, and what their and it also talks about a lot more about female to female emotions, like how Kunti spoke to her daughter-in-laws, and what the power equation there was. Them, like, she has suffered so much, how she according this thing. So I was absolutely enamored by this book. Like, I
Nice.
can't get to
Yeah,
it.
I think you sold it pretty well. Like, I'm really intrigued now.
Like, the first two books are like books I genuinely love. Like 100 Years of Solitude's on my all-time favorites list. Sputnik
Yeah,
Sweet, I like so I wanted to give you another Murakami, but then Murakami is very tricky with everything. If you give them, if people start off with a very fancy and like super heavy
I mean, I read Miko Kawakami because Murakami loves her.
yes.
So yeah, so I was mind blown by both the books, Eggs and Breast and Miss High Sandwich. So I
Yes.
think I do know I will like Murakami. It's just one of those where you're like, everyone's reading this, so should you? Like, it just stops you there. Is the
Murakami is, you will need to like try and eventually read like most of his work, because then you'll be able to criticize where he's going wrong, or what you think is, because there is a point where you find Murakami pretentious as well. Like, you're like, acha, theek hai, ab thoda.
Thanks for acknowledging.
Yeah, that happens. Like, that takes down to, but like but you also need to realize that there's a lot of genius hidden in his work. So you need to, so that is exactly what I just told you, like Sputnik Sweetheart, and not something like a Kafka on the Shore. Because if someone starts Kafka on the Shore, I bet like 50% of people will not like, will find him too, or too
I'd
like,
be blocked. I'd be like, this Siddharth was block him.
गालियां नहीं खानी मुझे लाइफ में, तो
ठीक है. So I think it sounds also nice. It sounds like something I would pick up.
yeah.
In the beginning, I used to also do this. Like, this cover looks nice, so I will read this book.
But it's an interesting thing. If you ever find the time to read *Sapiens*, right, by again one of those books everyone's read, but any book on like human anthropology, that gave me a very interesting insight into this, right?
Right.
How your instinct, right? What, like, even I as a kid, I used to have this tendency, and I still do. In fact, like, I just pick up a book because my fingers felt nice on it, or it just appealed to me, or like, oh, this book has caught my eye, and like, I'll just pick it up, and I'll end up. So apparently, your instincts are your DNA, which is hardwired across like thousands of years and passed down to you, right? So there is a lot more unacknowledged that goes on in our gut feeling or our intent. Like, when you intuitively reaching for something, it's actually and the hardcore fact being that 98% of your DNA will not decipher. Like, scientists still do not. Like, I mean, they know there's something there. It might, the assumption made there is that, well, your intuition or your gut feeling is what drives you towards choices that have been hardwired in DNA. So something like, when you, like, even a freshly born baby knows not to approach a hot pan, something along those lines, right? So these are things which is hardwired into your DNA. So maybe, so that's where I'm huge romantic, and I just gave that.
Yeah, I see a pattern in all the books that I picked. Interesting.
So like, I think, so by that logic, you should be completely trusting your choice. Sometimes you'll get messy books or weird books and you'll not like them, but that's life. I mean, I think all of us have those choices.
I think what you just said applies to like life in general, right? Sometimes you'll get messy and you can just put a blank there and fill anything in that. Yeah, and sometimes you'll get good books, sometimes not so good books.
More often than good, but like, there would be bad ones, but okay, that's just bound to happen. And on that on that beautiful note, talking about
beautiful note, yes. No, definitely.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for doing this. I absolutely love talking. It was
Same.
This was great, and please stay in touch. I will keep sending you book recommendations.
Yes, please. That I'd love that. And thank you to everyone who joined and stayed with us.
Yeah.
There are quite a few people. Yeah.
It's like this actually drives me to do more of my work, because initially I used to think that people won't be interested, but turns out there are so many people who are actually interested in knowing about books and like just opinions on books.
There's someone, Siddharth, who keeps asking this question. Can we just once see it? Because then I feel bad. Because otherwise they don't do these. No, sorry, I'm hijacking.
You're as an equal part of this. Which question are you talking about, Vesa?
Someone asked me about The Secret, and they keep asking because it keeps coming back.
I think I saw that.
But I don't know, it's gone now.
I'll read it. I found it. It's by Aditri Priya. Hey, Sainee, I really want to know your opinion about The Secret. Because you mentioned it, I think, once.
Oh, because I mentioned it. About The Secret.
Yes.
See, now I've read enough to, like, my cynical brain keeps defying it, but deep down inside, I do believe in the law of attraction. I might not be very hell-bent on it, but I do believe that you really have to manifest. So that part of The Secret I do believe in. And you know what I do with these books that I was just doing that? So there is this fun... There is this book called I don't know how to pronounce his name. Thick hand. Thick. Okay, I'll Google it and then I'll put it out. Okay, so there are these bunch of books that he writes. He's a Buddhist monk, very celebrated on mindfulness. Right. And there are like books on how to eat, how to sleep, how to read. So this how to love. And the thing that I do with this and with The Secret is that I just like do this and pick a page and then just read something out of it, and that's my day. So The Secret is that I literally use it like that. So one of the days I just pick it up and read, and then that day it'll tell me don't get attached and believe in attraction, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'll believe in attraction. But that's how that's the only commitment that I've given to these books. Okay, but I like it. Read more than The Secret, please.
Yeah, that is. Thank you. I think I think that your entire summary is quite a good reflection of what I feel about The Secret as well. I mean, I think deep down I believe in it, but deep
down inside we are all softies only. But the world has corrupted us now. This is what it is.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you.
Bye.
I'm going to follow you, and you have to keep sending books and force me to.
I am very good at this. Like sending like people that I'm good at. Yes.
Awesome. Sounds great.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.